This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Father Joseph Anthony.
Hello.
This is a little bit of a meta-narratival introduction.
Yeah, I was excited for this one. I want to see where it went.
As is often our custom, before talking about things, we'll talk about talking about things.
Yeah.
Because rather than simply talk about things, it can be pleasant to talk about talking about things.
Right.
Because it kind of warms you up, as it were, to the encounter.
We're like ogres. We got layers. Right.
So here, I'd like to inquire, what ways do you typically begin conversation, or in what ways do you typically begin conversations? I suppose it depends on where you are, where the other person is, the circumstances of the situation. But do you have certain go-tos, ways of breaking the ice, or introducing yourself?
Yeah, it's funny. We were having a conversation with our student ministry council, like our student leaders, and we were talking about this and how to engage people after Mass, mostly of our students, because people are just like running out. They like go to Mass and then get the heck out of there. And so we were talking about different ways to begin conversations and to initiate interaction with somebody, that we don't want to like kind of grab people like they're like a dog catcher or something, like, hey, I force you to talk to me. But there's ways that you can initiate an engagement. And really the best way to do that is a compliment. I always try to lead off with a compliment. But yeah. It tends to break people's barriers down, instead of like, hey, how you doing? How's the weather today? But if you're like, man, it's a really beautiful necklace, you know, give a compliment on something. And then the follow-up from that is always, well, tell me more about that. You know, you're wearing a Miami Heat jersey. Wow. Are you a Heat fan? No, just a LeBron James fan? Oh, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Like a way to give a compliment and then have a follow-up, to ask questions, and to invite somebody to tell a story. Most times it's telling a story about themselves. People love to talk about themselves. I do. I love to talk about me. It's one of my favorite subjects. I'm very interesting to myself.
Nice.
You know, I don't care if anybody thinks I'm interesting to anybody else, but to me, I'm awesome. You know, and so I think compliments and stories are the ways that we initiate things.
Nice. I'd like to confirm that you are awesome. So this is not something that you have imagined. It is true. All right, so you can abide in that truth. It's funny, as in thinking about meta-narratival entries to podcast episodes, I think that my whole life is meta-narratival. I'm not sure the degree to which I'm living, or whether I'm just talking about living, or thinking about living, or interpreting the living as it unfolds. Because I've noticed in a variety of encounters, when I introduce myself to a person, or when I begin to talk to a person, I'm like, I greet you. Or I say, I extend to you the hand clasp of fellowship. I just say stupid things that narrates what it is that's going on. You know, so like, I'm going to ask you a question. It's like, no kidding. Here it comes.
You just did.
You know, it's like, or I greet you. It's like, all right, well, was there anything substantive to your greeting, or are you just going to comment on the fact that you are? So this brings us actually to the subject of our episode today.
Yeah, exciting.
Which is small talk. So a lot of people out there have negative things to say about small talk.
Very, very negative things.
Like strongly formulated and vehemently expressed negative things. Can you bring us into that? Lead us into that? Why do people care so strongly and negatively about small talk?
I hear this all the time. People are like, I just hate small talk. You know, when I'm in events, I just want to be with one person and just like get to know them, you know? But when you're in small talk, it's like, you never get anywhere, you know.
Do you know anyone who talks like that?
There's a lot of people that, I don't know if they talk like that or not, but I hear them that way.
Okay.
So take that for what it's worth.
Great. Our next episode will be on judging. Just kidding. Moving on.
Yeah, there we go. No, but it's one of those things that people, they want real encounters. They want real relationships. And so I think there's this perception that anything that is surface level is not authentic, and thus is fake. And thus they hate it. It's like, I don't want to be in an environment where I have just small bite-sized conversations and it doesn't really do anything. Like, and there's this maybe conception that like the conversation also always has to provide something. And sometimes small talk provides absolutely nothing. And they think it's just filler. It's because a situation's awkward, or I don't really have a deep connection and relationships with this person. So all we can talk about surface things, and that's not that's not deep, so it's not real, so it's fake. And so I can go through a room of just, networking with people, or, walk into a room of people I don't know, and all I end up with is small talk, and that is sucking the life out of me because it's just surface level, it's fake, and all of that. So you'll hear people say, it's like, I hate small talk. Yeah, I don't want to go to that event because it's just going to be constant small talk. I want to go to something where I can have a deep encounter, a relationship with somebody. So I think there's that rejection of, or that the strong passions around small talk, because ultimately there's a desire and a hunger for deep relationships.
Yeah. It's interesting. Different people vibe with different size groups.
Yep.
So it's not just the members of said groups, but it's also like the constitution of said groups.
Yeah.
So like some people, they walk into a party with 150 people and they're like, let's go.
Yep.
Give me the aux cord. Let's start bobbing. And other people walk into that situation and they're like, maybe I could decreate myself and I wouldn't have to endure this scourge. And then other people will express it more in terms of like, I like a small group, like a sustained conversation amongst people who all contribute. So maybe 6 to 8 tops. Or some people are like, I'm just a one-on-one type person. And then the question is, one-on-one with somebody of the same sex, one-on-one with somebody of the opposite sex. Is it possible to do that well, chastely, virtuously, given your state in life and relative attraction? Okay, so there's like all of these pertinent considerations just about the constitution of the group or the number of persons involved. But then, regardless of which you gravitate towards, then there's this further consideration of the type of exchanges which you look forward to, or the type of exchanges that nourish you. Because it seems like, at least nowadays, with the younger generation, there's a great desire for authenticity,
1000%,
or like sincerity, or openness, like vulnerability, a kind of real sharing rather than a fake posturing, or a kind of competitive advancing, or whatever else that other people are doing. Yeah,
like,
exactly. So like people want to genuinely share their lives, which I think is cool. It strikes me as a cool thing.
It's one of the things that, like, as a college chaplain, the things that I will always be edified by the current generation of college students, and I'll tell people, is like, I'm very convicted that when you look at all the generations, everybody has their positives and things like that. The thing that this generation of college students has, they have the best BS meter I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They can sniff out inauthenticity and hypocrisy from miles away. Yeah. And they will follow anybody as long as that individual is authentic.
Yeah.
And so they crave authenticity. They can pick up inauthenticity very, very quickly, and they want nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because this corresponds to other kind of shifts or sea changes in the culture. I think maybe 15, 20 years ago, people were advocating or arguing for more in the way of destigmatization.
Yes.
And you see this kind of across the board or in different sectors of civil society. But you think about the mental health crisis.
Yep.
Like you watch the Super Bowl, you were kind of picking up on these 30-second ads here and there. There's an ad that talks about anxiety, so you have football players like Saquon Barkley and Steve Young describing how a third of a younger generation struggles with anxiety. Right. So it's the type of thing, it's on the TV screen. It's something that people are more open and sharing about. Like people in conversation will refer more readily to their therapist.
Yeah.
And they won't be like, I am going to a therapist. They'll just say, my therapist told me. It doesn't require prior explanation.
Right.
It's not something for which you need to apologize. It's not something for which you need to render an account. It's just part of life. So like you see destigmatization and things like that, which I think a lot of people would argue is good and healthy.
Yeah.
And then you see destigmatization in other things, which, more complicated still when we talk about like the same-sex attraction question, the gender question, like a lot of things sexuality-wise or orientation-wise are very much out there.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense in which like the vulnerability culture has kind of thrown in its lot with the destigmatization culture. So I just think you see a lot more, or you hear about a lot more. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, also the venues to be able to do that are more readily accessible. We can talk about social media, we can talk about all these types of things. And with each iteration of social media, it's gotten, I don't know what to say, like maybe more and more intimate.
Okay.
We've gone from, Facebook to Twitter, and those were all text-based ultimately. you know, and then Instagram became more image based, and then YouTube and TikTok are now video based, and Instagram Reels and are all those types of things. But it's jumping the intimacy, so it's kind of uniting all of that, and now you have the more venues for individuals to promote these kind of vulnerabilities, and the destigmatizations of this stuff is no longer just text on a screen, but it's a face that you can hear the inflection of their voice and the the furrow of the brow when they talk about these things, and you get to see maybe the pain and the tears when they talk about the hurt or the harm of it all. So the platforms that give the ability to give voice to these things are actually attaching intimate things. You get to see somebody's, the person's eyes are some of the most important, precious things because they convey so much. And so that kind of the oversharing and the destigmatization, I think, because of how the social media platforms have evolved, or now have a whole nother complication to it. And there's a lot of this encouraging or promotion of that.
That's interesting to think about it in terms of intimacy. This idea that with Twitter or X and with Facebook, you have text and image. And then with Instagram, you have image and video. With TikTok and YouTube, you have video and video. But to think about them as possessed of like a differentiated capacity to communicate intimacy.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's like people, they want to give you, like the word seems insufficient, even the image seems insufficient. It's to the point where I need to give you myself in the way that best captures who I am and what I am. And it's like, only videos fight, which is, that's just fascinating. You see people just FaceTiming for long periods of time on the metro, even not attending to the other. Like they won't actually be directly engaged, but it's like a thing that's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's like life and living Technicolor is the new medium for, intimacy and exchange. Okay. Well, thinking about those things, and then let's put it in conversation with the Christian tradition and like the virtues which inform social discourse. So I'm thinking like St. Thomas will talk about these different virtues which help us to live well in society, not just to kind of like manage our relationships, but to help us kind of effectuate this kind of sharing. Because there are certain virtues which are specifically tailored to safeguarding, kind of healing, growing this kind of sharing. So we'll talk about truthfulness, for instance. Like you have to be able to share what's real, because if you don't share what's real, then the whole civil society just crumbles, because it's just manipulation and control and advertising and mockery and protest and whatever else. Okay. Or you can talk about liberality, like a kind of generousness, a kind of spirit of giving, as it were. You can talk about affability, a kind of friendliness, which isn't necessarily friendship, but a kind of friendliness. You can talk about gratitude, giving thanks to benefactors, as it were, vindication, rectifying justice when it goes wrong. But then one I'm thinking of in particular, apropos of this conversation, is modesty.
Yes.
So like there's a sense in which it's virtuous to protect the inmost center of your person, not because you are ashamed, not because you are embarrassed, not because you are reticent to share in a way that would otherwise isolate you in unhealthy fashion, but because there are certain things that are kind of a secret between you and God, or between you and your family, or between you and your closest friends, or between you and your colleagues. So there's this sense that not all is to be shared. And that's a good thing. That's a virtuous thing. That's an appropriate thing given the differentiated relationships that kind of make up our life. So I don't know, like, what do you see when it comes to the landscape of modesty? Are there encouraging things? Are there discouraging things? Where do we find ourselves at present?
Confused. I think most people are confused about it, because they have this draw that they want to be authentic and they want to be open and vulnerable, and sometimes that becomes oversharing. It's like, hey, how's your day today? And then this whole flood of gate opens up, and you're like, this is not okay. This is oversharing. I'm not ready to receive that.
Okay.
And I think sometimes when people begin to overshare, it puts the other in a position where they feel like they are forced into a place that's like, I don't have that relationship, or I don't have the capacity to receive the, kind of the intimacy that you're sharing with me, and that doesn't mean, the opposite end of it though, is that people, and I see I've seen a number of students recently where they have an inability to articulate negative realities, and that's a totally different thing.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
If you see somebody and you're like, hey, how you doing? And this like bright-eyed smile. Oh my gosh, everything's great. It's so great. Everything's amazing. It's good. It's like, I know you're hurting. Like, I know you're struggling. And they're honest in the sense that when you ask questions, they'll always answer. It's like, hey, how have you been? How's classes going? Oh, good. Everything's great. Everything's great. Like, yep, hitting everything. Well, how about this one class? Yeah, I haven't gone in like 3 weeks.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, okay. Or other aspects like, hey, I know you just went through a breakup. Like, how's that going? Yeah, nope, everything's good. Everything's good. So have you been sleeping much? Nope. Okay, so let's talk about like, why aren't you falling asleep? I can't fall asleep. My mind's racing, and I just like, I'm just watching YouTube to get my mind off of her because I can need it. Okay, so you're not good. So like you have the one extreme where people are like immediately will dump everything into maybe a social dynamic that is not ready to receive that.
Yeah.
And then the other is people's inability to articulate negative things. So where's the modesty in that, right? And I think it's okay like to teach and get comfortable with like, hey, how you doing? I'm having a hard day. That communicates a reality that may be difficult or negative, but it's not oversharing. And that allows the other person the freedom to respond to that. It's like, I'm so sorry, I'll be praying for you. Or, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can help with? Like, is there something specific that's going on? I'm willing to step into that. So I think both of those extremes, either the dumping or the oversharing or the kind of inability to acknowledge and articulate it, both of those are really major problems that we see very active. Very rarely do we hear somebody say like, hey, it's just, I'm struggling in a few areas, but we're getting through. And that gives the ability for both people to be engaged in that conversation in ways that respect reality, but at the same time are healthy.
Yeah, it strikes me that, you could say this for most problems in our human experience, but what's at stake is the recovery of our human reality or the recovery of our human lives and dignity. Because I think that, human nature, it's complex and it can be complicated. Totally. And there are seasons in life, right? You describe human life typically in terms of a progression or a discursion or a kind of pilgrimage, as it were. So the idea is that you're, please God, mounting from strength to strength, but there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be twists and turns. There are going to be parts of that story which aren't easily recounted in the midst of it because you don't have a sense for what's at stake and where it's going. Okay, that's great. But to come before one's experience honestly, I think is the antecedent condition to coming before the other honestly.
Yep.
And so when we come before our experience honestly, we have to recognize, some things are better and some things are worse. Some things are easy and some things are hard. Sometimes are appropriate and sometimes are not. Sometimes it's for patience and sometimes it's for leaning on the support of another person. Yeah. But to do that requires a kind of virtuosity of spirit. It requires a kind of facility. It requires a kind of suppleness, as it were. And so it sounds like some people are like, listen, I want to be honest before the other and I'm going to overshare. And other people are like, I want to testify to the progress. I want to testify to the fact that we go from strength to strength. And I can trust that to a certain degree or extent. I want the other to trust that to a certain degree or extent. Maybe if I'm afraid that he or she will judge me or he or she will think less of me, whatever else. Right. But like, I think that we just have to come before our experience honestly, and maybe to think about these virtues as kind of safeguarding honesty or providing space, giving permission for honesty. I don't know if there are particular things that jump out when it comes to, coming before your experience with honesty or sincerity even.
Yeah, I mean, that it kind of starts with our engagement with the reality. It's like sometimes we have to admit it ourselves. And sometimes it means receiving the reality of our life circumstances and saying, hey, this is good, this is bad, and not trying to force it to become something that it's not. That kind of honesty, given one's own life, one's own struggles, one's own successes, we could talk about all these different virtues. Like that demands humility, and from that place to acknowledge in oneself what's good, what's hurting, what's not. And then from there, you can apply that to the different relationships and encounters and engagements that you have in a day.
Yeah.
If okay, I'm going to I want to talk to, my best friend later today. And now that way, the first person that approaches you on it, you don't dump everything into it. Because you text your friend, hey, I'm really struggling. Can we talk later tonight? I need to work through some stuff. That conversation's on its way.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just going to like bottle it up in the first person that says, hey, is everything okay? And show some care and concern. Yeah, here's everything. And then it goes. And it's like, maybe that's not the person to do that with.
Yeah.
And so I think having our ability to in humility to have that honest conversation on where we are in our life, then gives us the kind of right factors on how to engage with the other individuals in our life. If we do have a deep, intimate relationship, then we can work through that. If it's the barista at the coffee shop, it's not being fake to not bring up the deepest things that you're going through, but you don't need to distract people from that and play into a persona or something like that. So I think that humility to recognize the realities of one's life then allows you to have the direction on how to apply that or stand in that place, in that truth, with the other relationships that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so it sounds like things at stake. One, there need to be relationships in your life in which you can share.
Right.
All right. So like there have to be family members or close friends, colleagues, associates, whomever else with whom you can share. And then the degree to which you can share is going to be a factor of like how much your lives are bound up.
Yeah.
Right. So like St. Thomas will talk about communication in the good. Like what are the goods around which you congregate? How do they characterize your relationships? And then how do you pour into that? Like how do you lead into that? St. Thomas speaks neither of pouring into or leaning into, but you get the idea. So if you're congregating around real goods, serious goods, then that's going to give you a basis for more in the way of sharing. So I think you're making the judgment, who is this person? And then you're also making the judgment, what time of day is it? Has he or she already had her cup of coffee, his or her cup of coffee? These types of, like that's all pertinent. Yeah. Those are all helpful factors because you're going to, like at the end of the day, you want to share your life because our lives are experienced as precious to the degree and extent that they are shared and found precious to another. Not in that we're like total shills and we have no sense of self, but we're made to be relational, right? And we have to find ways of being relational that's appropriate to the people with whom, the time and place, the pertinent circumstances. And so I think that that's all super helpful, but it makes it so that we can be patient with our experience, patient with the other, and then patient with our lives as they are gradually unfolded to us or interpreted to us, as we work through them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think, getting back to the topic of the episode is like the virtue of small talk. Like small talk actually has a really important role in this.
Yeah.
And it's not something that is a filler for awkwardness. And it's not something that, even though so many people are like, I'd much rather have a one-on-one conversation in a deep, 45-minute conversation than, 45 one-minute conversations with other people. And I understand personality differences and things like that. For a lot of people, small talk sucks the life out of them and stuff. But I think it does have an opportunity to lead to deeper relationships. And I think you and I can understand, and no, we're not making the claim here that small talk is the epitome of communication, but not to immediately gloss over it or to try to jump over that. I think to go through small talk in pursuit of deeper relationships is really important. And sometimes it's like, I know I'm never going to see this individual again, but I also want to have a pleasant encounter with them. And one of the things I said to you before we started recording the episode is like, I would much rather be in situations where I actually have small talk with people than everybody pop in their AirPods and never talk to each other.
Yeah.
I want to encounter people. I want to get to know their stories, even if it's for a moment. I would much rather have that moment than having 250 people sit there, everybody on their AirPods, and nobody interact with each other. That's a weird dystopian place to be. And so I think small talk plays a role in that, and it allows interactions and encounters to take place that keep us in contact with our own humanity and the others.
Yeah.
That's so important.
Yeah. No, and I think too, it's like our human lives assume the shape that God permits them to assume, and they're going to assume the shape which providence unfolds for them. And I think that we can trust that the story is good, and we can trust that we play a role in said story, which is worthwhile. And so we don't have to find ourselves constantly trying to skip to the end or skip to greater intimacy than may in fact be present, or get like these various preliminaries out of the way, or have these hoops to be jumped through, cleared aside because we just want to get to the stuff of life. Like, this is all the stuff of life.
Yeah.
It's just all the stuff of life.
Yeah.
And this person is important. You might not be able to share with this person in a way that's super profound. But for me, sometimes the difference between a good morning and a bad morning is how kind the teller at the PNC Bank is. It's like, because listen, I don't want to be here because I'd rather be doing anything else, but if the person is like, hello, good to see you. How are you? What can I help you with? It's great. Yeah. And that's, transactional. There's a kind of an understanding that here I'm working with a service associate and that blah, blah, blah. Okay. But still, that person could be cranky, or that person could be not cranky. That person could ask a charming question or two without being invasive, or that person could not ask a question or two. Well, you get it. So I think that those types of encounters help provide a space in which we can gradually open up without feeling like we have to constantly get to the most significant sharing or the most whatever else it is that we feel that constitutes the real part of our life.
I also think that there's a trend in our current culture right now that you have to do the best. Like, let me figure out what the best is, and let's immediately do that. And it's like, there's a lot of intermediate steps before you get to that best.
Yeah.
And those are good intermediate steps. And to actually figure it out, like, this is what the best thing is, let's immediately jump there. I think we've done episodes on the past of like maximalism and things like that. Yeah. And I think people, their like visceral negative reaction to small talk is in that same line. It's like, it's okay to have an intermediate step and to know that this is always going to be an intermediate step, but there's a good that is able to be had, received, and given in this intermediate.
Yeah.
And that's not to be looked over.
Yeah, and I think that maybe just to kind of like sum up some points, it reflects the fact that we're human. It reflects the fact that we're on the way. It reflects the fact that we have a share in intelligence, and it reflects the fact that this is good. So it's like, we're human, body, soul composites. We're limited. We're going to get fatigued. We're going to get distracted. We're going to get dispersed. And not everything that we're able to do is going to be optimal, maximal, super intense, and intimate. There's going to be a lot of this, and it's going to be good, right? So, and then we're on the way. In our relationships, there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And hopefully the end lasts unto eternity. But at the beginning, you're going to do beginning stuff. And in the middle, you're going to do middle stuff. And in the end, you're going to do end stuff. And that's like totally appropriate. Because if you try to get too much into it, or if you try to get into it too quickly, sometimes you can actually alienate a person or terrify a person or whatever else it is. So like, okay, it's a human thing. I mean, we're on the way. But when you think about it too, it's like, it's good, right? In the sense that like talking is a very human thing. Father Timothy Danaher says this all the time. Talking helps. It's delightful to talk. You don't want to get addicted to talking so that you become drunk on your own words or verbalization. But it's just nice. It can be very pleasant to exchange. And if we find ourselves contemptuous of human realities like that, then I don't know. We're like losing our grip. We're losing our bearings. Like you said, we're just tossing in AirPods and optimizing or maximizing pleasure or use or whatever we think it is. Right. And then the whole of it is good in the sense that this has a place. Like, we have a share in the word, we have a share in God's intelligence, and we can give expression to it regardless of time and place and circumstance. All of which I think is super good, super charming. So it's worthwhile. Any final thoughts on small talk, its place, and how we use it?
When small talk is really good, it doesn't seem like small talk.
Yeah.
I've been with individuals who are very skilled at it. And I think that's the other thing, is to recognize it is a skill. And we talked about virtue, so it's worth cultivating.
Yeah.
It's worth really kind of perfecting how do I interact with strangers or things like that, to both put them at ease, but also to enjoy that engagement.
Yeah.
So I do think, like, if we jump to the practicals of it all, like, not to be afraid to take the risk and engage with strangers and engage with somebody on a small talk level, and to work on the skills that lead to that. Because if you are able to engage with somebody that is good at small talk, that's always a positive, pleasurable experience. And you're never left in a place where you feel worse about yourself, or that like you're just itching to get away. You enjoy the moments for what it is. And so to be able to perfect that skill and maybe provide that opportunity for somebody else who they themselves maybe are not comfortable in their own circumstances or whatever it may be, to provide that moment is a great gift to give.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like you might feel the awkwardness at the outset of like, I'm talking this much and he's talking that much. And we're talking about things which are like super low hanging fruit. And we're talking about things which are kind of silly or they're easy tropes or they're stereotypes. You might think about that stuff at the outset, but you're also kind of on a little bit of a quest. You're doing a little bit of a scavenger hunt, and you're finding the things that are of mutual interest so that you can get engrossed in common themes that open up to both of you and then cause that or bring about that sharing in life, which you ultimately desire or might desire. Some of us maybe don't.
Maybe everybody's like, I hate this.
Yeah, exactly. Never again. So
I think you are talking to two extroverts here.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm becoming more extroverted, I think, with each passing year.
I was going to say, like, there was a while there where I would have put you as an introvert, but now I think, you've crossed the Rubicon of extroversion.
Exactly. And like Caesar, I find myself in the Italy of... Never mind. Keep going.
Okay, end it.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks so much for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you would, like and subscribe to the episodes. Leave a 5-star review. You can't you can't subscribe to an episode. Like the episodes, subscribe to the podcast, do whatever else feels right. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, you can follow the link in the description to contribute on our Patreon page. And then you'll find in that same description links for merchandise and for upcoming events. So we've announced the All-Comers Retreat in Malvern, Pennsylvania, June 7th through 9th. So that's for everybody age 21 and up. And then we're also announcing now our men's retreat, which is to take place in Brevard, North Carolina. It's the second weekend of August. I think the dates there are August 8th through 11th with Father Patrick and Father Bonaventure. And that's going to be for men age 21 to maybe 40, I think it is. You'll find details about that and the ability to, or the signups for, said retreat on our website at godsplaining.org. So look forward to seeing you at one or the other or both. That's it. Know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining. Father Jacob Bertrand.
Father Gregory.
A Dominican, a Franciscan, and a Jesuit walk into a bar. One of them asks the audience to subscribe. That's not a joke. Any ways you can improve upon it?
Just don't tell jokes.
Right. This is not a joke. Please subscribe. Cheers.